The Great Hall on Centauri Prime was bigger than most cities on Earth. Thousands of seats filled the space, each one designed for a different alien species. Some seats were tall and thin for the crystal beings called Zephyrians. Others were wide and low for the snake-like Vorthak. Strange machines floated in the air for species that had no solid bodies at all. Jake Morrison sat alone at the human table. He was 62 years old with gray hair and deep lines around his eyes. His blue uniform looked plain compared to the shining armor and flowing robes worn by other delegates. No one sat near him. No one talked to him. Most aliens looked at him like he was something unpleasant they had stepped on. The yearly meeting of all galaxy species was starting. Leaders from 1,000 worlds had come to talk about important matters. Trade deals worth more money than Earth had ever seen. Wars between star systems. Laws that affected billions of beings across space. But today, many aliens seemed more interested in talking about humans. Ambassador Zektar stood up from his insect-like chair. His body looked like a giant praying mantis made of black metal. When he spoke, his voice sounded like grinding gears. "Friends of the galaxy," Zektar said, his arms spreading wide. "We meet again to guide our great civilization forward. But I must ask, how long will we carry dead weight?" Laughter filled the hall. Not human laughter, but the sounds aliens made when they found something funny. The Zephyrians made a sound like breaking glass. The Vorthak hissed through their teeth. Floating energy beings pulsed with bright colors. "The humans think they belong here," said Chancellor Vexoth. He was 12 feet tall and made of living crystal that changed colors when he moved. "They send their little ships between stars like toys. They fight with metal bullets while we reshape matter itself." More laughter. Jake kept his face calm, but his hands tightened into fists under the table. High Imperator Krexel stood up next. He was even bigger than the crystal being, with scales like armor and wings that could cover a small house. When dragons had been just stories on Earth, his people had been conquering solar systems. "Humans are children playing with adult tools," Krexel said, his voice deep enough to shake the floor. "In 5,000 years, my people have built an empire spanning 3 galaxy arms. In the same time, humans learned to make fire." The insult was not fair, and everyone knew it. Humans had only been in space for 300 years. They had only met alien life 50 years ago. But fairness did not seem to matter to anyone in the hall. "During the Void Plague crisis," said Admiral Quindar, "human ships were too slow to help. Their weapons were too weak. They contributed nothing while real civilization saved the galaxy." Admiral Quindar looked like a giant octopus with silver skin. Her people controlled the biggest fleet in known space. Her ships could cross the galaxy in days while human vessels took months. "The Andromedean crisis was the same story," added Counselor Zix. He had no body that anyone could see, just a voice that came from empty air. Human forces arrived after the battle was over. They were useless. Jake Morrison had been a soldier before he became a diplomat. He had fought in 3 wars and seen friends die in battles that would never be written in history books. He knew how to stay calm when people said things meant to make him angry. But sitting in this hall, listening to beings who had never bled for anyone call his species useless, Jake felt something cold and hard growing in his chest. Lisa Carter sat next to him. She was Earth's chief diplomat, young and smart and good at her job. She started to stand up, ready to defend humanity with facts and charts and careful words. Jake put his hand on her arm. "Not yet," he said quietly. "They're lying about what happened," Lisa whispered. "The records show—" "I know what the records show," Jake said. "Let them talk." Around the hall, more aliens stood to speak. Each one had something bad to say about humans. They were too violent, too stupid, too primitive. They bred too fast and thought too slowly. They had no place among the advanced species of the galaxy. "Humans still get sick," laughed Ambassador Thys. Her people had removed disease from their bodies 1,000 years ago. "They still age and die like animals." "They fight wars over water and land," said General Morth. His species had learned to create matter from energy. "Like savages squabbling over scraps. Their ships break down constantly," added Chief Engineer Blix. "We have to rescue them from their own technology failures." The mockery went on for an hour. Every major species in the galaxy took turns explaining why humans were a burden on civilized society. They talked about humanity like parents talking about a child who had not grown up properly. Jake Morrison listened to every word. He remembered every insult and every lie, and he began to plan what he would say when his turn came to speak, because Jake knew something these aliens did not know. He knew the real story of what had happened during the crises they mentioned. He knew about the humans who had died to save alien worlds. He knew about the sacrifices that had been erased from official records, and he knew that very soon he was going to remind this galaxy exactly what humans were capable of when they were pushed too far. The temperature in the Great Hall seemed to drop as Jake Morrison smiled for the first time since the meeting began. The laughter in the Great Hall slowly died down. But the cruel smiles on alien faces did not go away. They had enjoyed mocking humanity, and now they wanted to do something about their feelings. High Imperator Krexel spread his massive wings. The action was a threat display among his people. It meant he was about to do something important and dangerous. Every alien in the hall understood the signal and grew quiet. "Fellow beings of advanced thought," Krexel began, his voice carrying to every corner of the huge room. "We have spoken much truth today about the human problem, but talk changes nothing. I say the time has come for action." Nervous energy moved through the crowd like electricity. When the draconian hegemony talked about taking action, entire star systems usually ended up as burned rocks floating in space. "I call for a formal vote," Krexel announced. "Let us decide once and for all what to do with this primitive species that claims to belong among us." Chancellor Vexoth's crystal body flashed with approval. "The Zephyrian Empire seconds this motion." "What exactly do you propose, Imperator?" Krexel's reptilian lips pulled back to show teeth like curved swords. "Protected status. We will treat humans like the ancient species we keep in biological preserves. They can live on their little worlds and play with their little machines. But they will no longer pretend to be equals in galactic affairs." The hall erupted in excited chatter. This was bigger than simple mockery. This was about removing humanity from all important decisions in the galaxy. Humans would become pets, kept alive for curiosity but given no real power. "Brilliant," hissed Commander Saul of the Vorthak Dominion. His snake-like body coiled with pleasure. "We can study them as examples of early evolutionary development. They would make interesting specimens," agreed Dr. Keth from the Neural Collective. "Their primitive emotional responses could teach us much about our own forgotten past." Ambassador Zektar clicked his mandibles together rapidly, the insect equivalent of applause. "The hive worlds support this proposal completely. Humans have proven they cannot handle advanced civilization responsibly. One by one, the great powers of the galaxy voiced their agreement. The Stellar Federation talked about efficiency and resource management. The Ethereal Collective mentioned spiritual purity and evolutionary necessity. The machine consciousness calculated probability matrices that all pointed to the same conclusion. Humanity should be removed from galactic politics permanently. Jake Morrison sat perfectly still through it all. His breathing was calm and steady. His hands rested flat on the table in front of him. To any observer, he looked like a man who had accepted his fate without complaint. Lisa Carter was not so calm. Her face had gone red with anger and embarrassment. She kept trying to access her computer to pull up data files that would prove the aliens wrong about human contributions to galactic security. "Jake," she whispered urgently, "we have to respond to this. The treaties alone—" "The treaties won't matter if we're declared a protected species," Jake said quietly. "Protected species don't get to sign treaties." "Then we have to fight this vote," Lisa said. "The records clearly show that humans have saved alien lives in every major crisis. You can prove that humans died for aliens who never thanked them," Jake interrupted. "You can prove that human sacrifice was erased from history books written by species who wanted to take credit for themselves." Lisa stared at her colleague in confusion. "Then why aren't you doing something?" Jake turned to look at her. For a moment, Lisa saw something in his eyes that made her remember that Jake Morrison had not always been a diplomat. Before he learned to speak softly in meeting rooms, he had been a Marine colonel who settled arguments with much more direct methods. "Because," Jake said, "sometimes you have to let your enemies think they've already won." On the main floor of the hall, the formal voting process was beginning. Each species would state their position clearly for the official record. Then they would cast their votes using the ancient crystals that had governed galactic law for 10,000 years. The Zephyrian Empire voted first. The Crystal Throne finds humans unfit for continued participation in galactic governance. We vote for protected status. The Draconian Hegemony was next. The Scaled Crown agrees. Humans require protection from responsibilities they cannot handle. Protected status approved. Species after species cast their votes. The Vorthak Dominion, the Insect Hives, the Neural Collective, the Machine Consciousness. Every major power in the galaxy lined up to strip humanity of its rights and freedoms. Some smaller species voted with obvious reluctance. The peaceful traders of Andromeda had done good business with human merchants. The mining guilds had found humans to be reliable partners in dangerous work. But none of them were willing to stand against the united will of the galactic superpowers. As the voting continued, Jake Morrison finally stood up. The movement was slow and deliberate, like a mountain deciding to relocate itself. Every eye in the hall turned to watch him. "The human delegation requests the right to address this assembly before the final vote is recorded," Jake said. His voice was not loud, but somehow it carried clearly to every corner of the massive hall. Laughter erupted again. The idea that anyone cared what humans had to say seemed hilarious to most of the delegates. "By all means," Chancellor Vexoth said, his crystal form shimmering with amusement. "Let the primitive speak his piece. We could all use some entertainment before we conclude this historic vote." "Perhaps he will tell us a story about human honor," mocked Admiral Quindar, "or explain how losing every major battle somehow makes them heroes." "Maybe he wants to bargain," suggested Commander Saul. "Humans are always trying to make deals when they should be surrendering." Jake Morrison walked slowly toward the center of the hall. Each step echoed in the sudden quiet that followed the laughter. He carried no notes, no data files, no technological aids of any kind. His hands were empty except for the small pin on his collar that showed he had once been a soldier. Behind him, Lisa Carter watched with growing concern. She had no idea what Jake planned to say, but she knew it would determine humanity's fate for generations to come. In front of him, thousands of alien beings waited to hear what a member of a soon-to-be extinct political species had to say in his own defense. Jake Morrison reached the speaking platform and turned to face the assembly. For a long moment, he said nothing at all. He simply looked at the aliens who had just voted to end human freedom, and then he smiled. Jake Morrison stood alone in the center of the greatest political hall in the known galaxy. Around him, thousands of beings from hundreds of worlds watched and waited. Some were curious about what he might say. Others were already bored, ready for this interruption to end so they could finish their vote. None of them expected what came next. "You talk about the void plague," Jake said. His voice was calm and clear, carrying easily through the vast space without any electronic help. You say humans contributed nothing when that horror swept through the Outer Rim 17 years ago. Chancellor Vexoth shifted in his crystal seat. The Void Plague was not a pleasant memory for anyone who had lived through it. Entire star systems had simply stopped existing, consumed by something that turned matter into empty space. "Let me tell you what really happened," Jake continued, "because apparently some of you have forgotten." Ambassador Zektar clicked his mandibles in annoyance. "We all know what happened, human. The plague was stopped by combined fleet action and advanced technology that your species could not provide." Jake turned to look directly at the insect being. "Is that what your history books say?" "That is what happened," Zekoth insisted. "No," Jake said simply. "That is what you wish had happened." A murmur of confusion ran through the hall. Several aliens began to access their data systems, calling up official records of the Void Plague crisis. "The plague started in the Kepler sector," Jake said, beginning to pace slowly around the speaking platform. "It consumed the mining world of Threshold first, then the agricultural colonies of Green River and New Kansas. Within days, it was spreading, faster than your fastest ships could track it." "We remember the expansion pattern," said Admiral Quindar impatiently. "Your point?" "My point is what happened next," Jake replied. "Your combined fleets tried to stop it. The Zephyrian Empire sent 12 crystal warships with reality-bending weapons. The Draconian Hegemony deployed their planet-killer dreadnoughts. The Vorthak Dominion brought mobile fortress cities." Jake stopped pacing and faced the assembly directly. "And the plague consumed them all." Uncomfortable silence filled the hall. No one liked to remember how helpless their advanced civilizations had been against the spreading horror. 43 ships from 7 different species," Jake continued, "gone in minutes. Your weapons could not touch it. Your shields could not stop it. Your fastest ships could barely stay ahead of it as it spread." "The plague was eventually contained," High Imperator Krexel said defensively. "Advanced science found a solution." "Advanced science," Jake repeated. "Is that what you call Captain Kevin Blake?" More confused murmurs rippled through the crowd. Many aliens began searching their databases for information about this human name they had never heard before. "Captain Blake was 28 years old," Jake said. "He commanded a freight hauler called New Horizon. 200 years old, built to carry mining equipment between asteroid colonies. Top speed was about half what your slowest warship could manage." "Then why are you mentioning him?" demanded Commander Saul. "Because when your fleets ran away, Captain Blake flew directly into the plague." The hall fell completely silent. "He had a crew of 11 other humans," Jake continued. "Engineers mostly, a few miners. People who fixed broken machines and moved rocks from one place to another. Nothing impressive by your standards." Jake's voice remained calm, but something in his tone made the aliens listen more carefully. "They flew their old cargo ship into the heart of the plague while your advanced civilizations fled to safe distances and tried to figure out what had gone wrong with their perfect weapons." "That was suicide," said Dr. Keth from the Neural Collective. "Pointless sacrifice that accomplished nothing." "Did it?" Jake asked. "Let me tell you what Captain Blake and his crew discovered when they flew into that nightmare." Jake stopped moving and stood perfectly still. When he spoke again, his words carried to every corner of the hall. The plague was not some mysterious force beyond understanding. It was a weapon, an ancient device left behind by a dead civilization designed to consume matter and convert it to energy. Your sensors could not detect it because it existed partially, outside normal space-time. Several aliens were now frantically checking their records, trying to verify what this human was saying. "But Captain Blake's ship was old and primitive," Jake continued. "It had metal components that your advanced ships had replaced with energy fields generations ago. And metal, it turned out, was exactly what the weapon could not process." "Impossible," said Chancellor Vexoth. Our scientific analysis showed— Your scientific analysis was wrong, Jake interrupted. Captain Blake and his crew figured out in 12 hours what your best minds had missed completely. The plague was vulnerable to simple iron oxide. Rust, the word hung in the air like an accusation. So they took their cargo ship, with its primitive metal hull, and they flew it directly into the weapon's core. They vented their entire atmosphere into space, carrying iron dust from their mining equipment into the heart of the plague. Jake's voice dropped to barely above a whisper, but somehow every being in the hall heard every word. All 12 humans died that day. Their ship was torn apart by forces that bent reality itself. But the iron dust they carried poisoned the ancient weapon and caused it to collapse. The official records, began Admiral Quindar. The official records say the plague was stopped by combined scientific effort and advanced technology, Jake said. They mention Captain Blake and his crew in a footnote, if at all. Jake looked around the hall, meeting the eyes of species that had, moments before, been confident in their superiority. 12 humans died to save a galaxy that would not even remember their names. And you want to know why they did it? No one answered. Because someone had to, Jake said simply. Because the alternative was watching entire civilizations die while the greatest minds in the galaxy stood around trying to figure out why their perfect weapons did not work. The silence in the hall was now complete. Even the background hum of life support systems seemed to have stopped. That is what humans contributed to stopping the Void Plague, Jake said. 12 lives, and the willingness to fly into hell itself because it was the right thing to do. Jake Morrison turned and began walking back toward his seat, but he was not finished talking. Now, he said without looking back, would anyone like to hear about the Andromedan crisis? Jake Morrison had only taken 3 steps away from the speaking platform when High Imperator Krexel's voice boomed across the hall. Stop right there, human. Jake paused, but did not turn around. The great dragon's voice carried a note that had not been there before. Uncertainty. One incident does not prove anything, Krexel said, but his words lacked the confidence he had shown earlier. Even if your story is true, it was still just one ship. One small contribution to a galactic effort. Now Jake did turn around. He looked up at the massive reptilian being with something that might have been pity. One incident? Jake asked. Is that what you think the Andromedan crisis was? Admiral Quindar's tentacles writhed with agitation. The Andromedan crisis was 5 years ago. The Raiders broke through our defensive lines and threatened core worlds throughout the galaxy. It was stopped by coordinated fleet action. Coordinated fleet action, Jake repeated. That is certainly one way to describe what happened. Jake walked back to the center of the hall. This time, the aliens watched him with something approaching respect, or maybe fear. 5 years ago, Jake began, the Andromedan Raiders launched the largest invasion in galactic history. 15,000 ships, each one the size of a small moon. They had been building their fleet in dark space for centuries, preparing to sweep away every civilization they encountered. We know the basic facts, said Chancellor Vexoth impatiently. Your point? My point is that your fleets ran away, Jake said bluntly. Angry sounds erupted from a dozen different species. How dare this primitive human suggest that their proud military forces had shown cowardice? The Zephyrian Empire lost 37 crystal dreadnoughts in the first engagement, Jake continued, ignoring the protests. The Draconian hegemony retreated after losing half their battle wings. The Vorthak Dominion fell back to defensive positions and refused to advance. We were regrouping, protested Commander Saul, preparing for a coordinated counterattack. You were hiding, Jake said simply. And while you were hiding, the Raiders broke through to Earth's solar system. The hall grew quiet again. Most aliens remembered the news reports from that time. Earth, the human homeworld, had been written off as lost. No one had expected the primitive human fleet to last more than a few hours against 15,000 advanced warships. 1,200 human ships against 15,000 raiders, Jake said. Those were the odds when the enemy reached our home system. Impossible odds, agreed Dr. Keth. No reasonable commander would attempt to fight under such circumstances. No reasonable commander, Jake nodded. But humans are not always reasonable. Jake began to pace again, but this time his movement seemed more predatory, like a hunter circling prey. Let me tell you about Corporal Nancy Rodriguez, he said. 26 years old, born on Luna, grew up fixing atmospheric processors in the mining tunnels. Enlisted in the Space Guard because someone had to defend her home. A single soldier cannot affect a battle involving thousands of ships, said Ambassador Zektar dismissively. Cannot? Jake asked. Or should not? Jake stopped pacing and faced the assembly directly. When the raiders broke through our outer defenses, Corporal Rodriguez was working maintenance on Lunar Station 7. The station controlled defensive satellites protecting 16 million people living in the underground cities. Several aliens were now accessing their combat archives, trying to find records of this engagement that they had dismissed as unimportant. The raiders' first antimatter bombs disabled the station's main reactor, Jake continued. Secondary power failed. Communication systems went down. The defensive satellites were dead in space. Standard military doctrine would be to evacuate the station, noted General Morth. Standard military doctrine was followed, Jake agreed. Everyone evacuated. Everyone except Corporal Rodriguez. Why would one soldier remain at a dead station? Asked Admiral Quindar. Because she realized something that the evacuation order had missed, Jake said. The station's fusion reactor could be manually overloaded. It would take someone staying behind to do it, but it could be done. Jake's voice grew colder. And if someone could overload that reactor at exactly the right moment, when the raider fleet was in close formation above Luna, the explosion might take out enough enemy ships to give our main fleet a fighting chance. The implications of what he was saying began to sink in. Several aliens checked their data files again, looking for any mention of this incident. Corporal Rodriguez stayed behind alone, Jake said. No backup, no communication with command, no guarantee that her sacrifice would matter at all. She stayed, because 16 million people were counting on those defensive satellites, and someone had to try. The explosion, Chancellor Vexoth said slowly. We detected it from 3 star systems away. 312 raider ships, Jake said, gone in an instant. The debris field disrupted their entire formation and gave Admiral Cole the opening he needed to launch a counterattack. One human did this? Asked High Imperator Krexel. One human who was willing to die for people she had never met, Jake confirmed. Because that is what humans do when everything is on the line. Jake looked around the hall at faces that no longer showed mockery or contempt. Now they showed something much more dangerous to the alien's sense of superiority. They showed doubt. But surely, said Dr. Keth desperately, this was an isolated incident. Most humans would not what? Jake interrupted. Let me tell you about Commander Paul Stevens, who flew his damaged ship directly into a raider dreadnought to stop it from bombarding the refugee convoy from Titan. Jake began walking toward the alien delegates, and several of them instinctively leaned back in their seats. Or Captain Maria Santos, who stayed behind to evacuate civilians from Europa Station while raider boarding parties hunted her through the corridors. Or Lieutenant Tony Walsh, who held the engine room of the battleship Freedom for 6 hours against raider troops, keeping the ship fighting even after the bridge was destroyed. With each name, Jake's voice grew stronger. With each story, the aliens seemed to shrink smaller in their seats. Or Sergeant Linda Hayes, who crawled through burning wreckage to rescue wounded Zephyrian allies from a crashed crystal fighter. Or Private Bobby Chin, who carried ammunition to the gun crews for 12 straight hours while raider ships pounded his position into rubble. Jake had reached the front row of alien delegates. He looked down at beings who had ruled the galaxy for thousands of years and saw something he had never seen before in their eyes. Fear. You want to know what makes humans dangerous? Jake asked quietly. It is not our ships or our weapons or our technology. It is that we do not know when to quit. The silence in the hall was absolute. 10,000 beings held their breath, waiting for what came next. We do not run cost-benefit analyses on heroism, Jake said. We do not calculate acceptable losses for doing what is right. When everything is hopeless and any rational species would surrender, humans ask only one question. Jake leaned forward, and his voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried to every corner of the massive hall. What would happen to the innocent people if we gave up? Jake Morrison stood before the most powerful beings in the galaxy. These creatures had conquered star systems when Earth was still ruled by dinosaurs. They had built empires that spanned multiple galaxy arms. They had weapons that could crack, planets and technology that bent the laws of physics to their will. But right now, they looked very small. "You have built a perfect galaxy," Jake said, his voice carrying clearly to every corner of the vast hall. "Efficient, logical, calculated. Every decision is made by computer analysis. Every risk is measured against potential reward. Every loss is acceptable as long as the numbers work out in the end." High Imperator Krexel shifted uncomfortably on his perch. The great dragon had expected to spend this day humiliating a primitive species. Instead, he found himself questioning everything he thought he knew about civilization. "Your fleets are magnificent," Jake continued, walking slowly among the alien delegates. "Your weapons are beyond anything humans can build. Your technology makes our greatest achievements look like children's toys." Chancellor Vexoth's crystal form had stopped changing colors entirely. For the first time in his 1,000-year life, the Zephyrian leader was completely still. "But you have optimized away the one thing that matters when the universe goes dark," Jake said. "You have forgotten how to sacrifice." Ambassador Zektar's mandibles clicked nervously. "Sacrifice is inefficient. Modern civilization has evolved beyond such primitive concepts." Jake stopped walking and turned to face the insect being directly. "Has it?" The simple question hung in the air like a challenge. "Let me ask you something," Jake said. "All of you, when was the last time anyone from your species died to save someone they did not know?" Silence. "When was the last time one of your people gave up their life for a principle instead of a profit?" More silence. "When was the last time your military leaders asked, 'What is right?' instead of, 'What are the odds?'" Jake looked around the hall and saw the truth in thousands of alien faces. They could not answer because the answer was never, or so long ago that they had forgotten. "You have become very good at living," Jake said quietly, "but you have forgotten how to die for something greater than yourselves." Admiral Quindar's tentacles coiled with distress. "Death is wasteful. Modern strategy minimizes casualties through superior planning and technology." "Superior planning," Jake repeated. "Is that what you call running away when the fighting gets hard?" "We do not run away," protested Commander Saul. "We make tactical retreats to preserve valuable resources." "Valuable resources," Jake said. "Like your own lives." The accusation hit like a physical blow. These were proud military leaders from warrior species, but Jake's words forced them to confront an uncomfortable truth. When had any of them last risked everything for victory? "Humans do not make tactical retreats when innocent lives are at stake," Jake said. "We make final stands. We hold the line. We buy time for others to escape, even when we know we will not survive to see if our sacrifice mattered." Jake began to pace again, but now his movement had a different quality. He moved like a predator that had cornered its prey and was deciding where to strike. "You mock us for being primitive," he said, "for fighting with metal bullets and chemical rockets, for getting sick and growing old and dying like animals." "Because you are primitive," said Dr. Keth weakly. "Evolution moves toward perfection. Your species clings to outdated biological limitations." "Does it?" Jake asked. "Or have we kept something that you lost along the way?" Jake stopped in the center of the hall and spread his arms wide, as if embracing the entire assembly. "You want to know what makes humanity dangerous?" he asked. "What makes us worth fearing even though our ships are slower and our weapons are weaker and our lives are shorter than yours?" Every being in the hall leaned forward to hear the answer. We still remember what it means to be more afraid of failing others than of dying ourselves. The words echoed in the vast space like a judgment. "When the next crisis comes," Jake said, his voice rising for the first time, "and it will come because evil never stops trying, you will face a choice. You can calculate the odds and run tactical analyses and hold committee meetings to determine the most efficient response." Jake's eyes blazed as he looked at the assembled representatives of galactic civilization. "Or you can call humans." The silence that followed was deeper than space itself. "Because we will fly into hell for strangers. We will die for people we have never met. We will sacrifice everything for principles that do not profit us at all." Jake turned and began walking back toward his seat, but his voice carried clearly behind him. "We will do this not because we are too stupid to calculate the odds, but because we have calculated something else entirely. We have calculated what the galaxy becomes if no one is willing to pay the price for protecting it." He reached his chair and sat down next to Lisa Carter, who was staring at him in amazement. "So go ahead," Jake said, his voice returning to its original calm tone. "Pass your resolution. Declare humanity irrelevant. Put us in a preserve where we cannot interfere with your perfect, efficient, logical civilization." Jake folded his hands on the table and looked directly at High Imperator Krexel. "But remember this moment when the darkness comes calling again. Remember this moment when you need someone crazy enough to charge into impossible odds because it is the right thing to do." Jake Morrison leaned back in his chair and smiled. "Remember this moment when you realize that the greatest military asset in the galaxy is not superior technology or overwhelming numbers. It is the willingness to die for people who will never know your name." The Great Hall of Centauri Prime remained silent for a full minute. 10,000 beings from 1,000 worlds sat without moving, processing what they had just heard. Finally, Chancellor Vexoth rose from his crystal throne. His voice, when he spoke, was different than it had been at the beginning of the day. The Zephyrian Empire withdraws its support for the resolution regarding human status. One by one, other species began to follow. The Draconian Hegemony, the Vorthak Dominion, the Neural Collective. Each withdrawal was quiet, almost embarrassed. By the end of the day, not a single species was willing to vote for putting humanity in a preserve. But across the galaxy, something else began to happen. Military academies started teaching new courses. Strategic planning committees added new questions to their analyses, and when faced with impossible choices, commanders began asking a question that had not been heard in civilized space for thousands of years. What would a human do? The answer, they were beginning to understand, might just save them all.